heroine in the Necropolis Enforcement Files series.
Ms. Lacey.
All right. Hi, I am E.M. Lacey. I am a dark fantasy horror author. I love vampires. I love villains, period. And I always like to make my vampires tend to be douchebags, but, whatever.
Stephen.
Stephen Van Patten here from the world famous www.laughingblackvampire website. I am a horror writer of various things, but vampires tends to be something I'm known for, especially after the Brookwater's Curse series.
So let's actually start with that great joy of how did you first meet your favorite vampire? Where did you meet just vampire lore in general? For me, it's kind of hard to remember, but for me, it probably was Bela Lugosi. It was the good old classic Universal monster movies and films. So Rick, how about you? Where did you get to meet your first vampire?
Well, I'm not quite that old school, but I grew up with the Hammer vampire movie, Dracula movies, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing. I know at one point Peter Cushing he did one of the Shaw Brothers movies, Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. So I grew up with them back when vampires were still considered, still kind of alluring, but definitely monsters.
My favorite story out of the Hammer films with him was the fact that there was time he did not want to do the film, so he refused to speak the entire movie. Alledria, how about you? How did you get to meet your first vampire?
My first vampire was actually Dracula with the original book by Bram Stoker. But the first one that I think I fell in love with has got to be Louis from Interview with a Vampire. I wanted to, I couldn't help myself but be like, how could you have all of this power and still want to go back to being a lowly mortal? But somehow he carved a little space in my heart.
Jenny?
Oh, Louis, still whining. That was my favorite one. My first I have actually two. Growing up in Southern California, grew up in Ventura, which is about an hour north of LA and 30 minutes south of Santa Barbara. And UCSB used to do movie stuff all the time, and we got the flyers, and one of them was for Nosferatu, which was horrific, and basically the bane of my childhood existence because I had to take the trash out on the long, dark walk on the side of our house. I knew Nosferatu was lurking for me, but that was recovered because of Frank Langella's Dracula. Oh my God. That was when I realized, young enough, that Dracula could be unbelievably sexy. And because Frank Langella was unbelievably sexy in that role. And I was just like, oh, they're not all creepy. Some of them are suave, debonair, and handsome. I avoided reading Dracula until I was an adult because horror scares me. And I wasn't sure if I'd be able to see Frank Langella in my mind if I'd seen Nosferatu. But really, Frank Langella, thank you so much for really, really helping stimulate my entire life.
Em, how about you?
I used to watch, creature features. And so I would watch like the old Dracula movies. And then my favorites were, Abbott and Costello meet all of, the Hollywood monsters. And so it would be Dracula, Wolfman, Frankenstein. And then I evolved when I saw, I guess you'd say, Bram Stoker's Dracula. That was pretty amazing. Like I love that movie. And then reading Stephen King, like Night Flyers, Salem's Lot, those kind of things. So that was my intro. And I just love vampires.
Steven?
Well, kind of like Rick, the very first thing I was introduced to, because, as a little kid, my mother was very much into that particular time slot of horror movies where it was all those Hammer films. And that's when I got my first taste of Dracula. And then, it didn't even occur to me till as an adult, to your earlier point. It's like, why isn't he talking? I mean, he's scary, but he doesn't say much. So he kind of started me off, and then of course Blackula, and then PBS played all the old Universal stuff, and then I caught up with all that. And it was funny because like the vampire movie, horror movie thing, that was kind of like a bonding time with my mother, until she saw Danny Glick from Salem's Lot in the original David Solvert, and something about children scratching on a window that basically, like, I signed up and she signed out. And except for, and it's funny because except for my stuff, my mother has nothing to do with horror anymore. She's like, in church, she's given up the whole thing. But that plus Blackula somehow sliding in there and then inspiring the stuff I do now, that's kind of where I got it.
How many times did you go stand outside the window and scratch on the glass?
She would have beat my ass. I mean, that would not have worked out.
Totally worth it.
That was back in the 70s. You could actually beat a kid. So no, that would not have been good.
He's alive, so never. He never did.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, my mother broke a bunch of yardsticks over my behind. And then we get mad because I'd laugh.
Well, everybody's got a kink, right?
So, Alledria, a few years back, kicked off a series called Underworld. I actually saw it in the theater. I will never forget that. Kate Beckinsale standing there in that bodysuit and just plunging off the top. The nice big war between the vampires and the werewolves. I mean, this is classic dark fantasy, monsters, nothing but pure fun and horror, right? So what introduced you into the world? What pulled you across to go see the film? Or start the series, I guess I should ask.
Like Steven just said, everybody's got a kink. Kate Beckinsale in a bodysuit. Wait, what?
I co-sign that.
And not going to deny it.
Then there's the various members of the cast shirtless in the trailer. It's like, okay, I'm in. And then you tell me that there's monsters involved too? Sweet, sign me up.
All right, so here's the important question. Which side did you fall on, the vampires or the werewolves?
I didn't care who was winning. I wanted to see the people. I literally, it's like if you ask me, vampire or werewolf, who should be running the world, I very much agree with whatever my monster overlord happens to be.
Jenny?
I just rewatched Blade. I have never gotten into Underworld, or as some of my friends and I call it, underwear. We've never gotten into it ever. There were not enough pretty men that I saw. I'm not lying. I am completely dedicated to good-looking leading men. And if I don't think your leading man is good-looking enough, in other words, Interview with the Vampire was like one of the best movies ever made, right? Because it had good-looking leading men in droves, right? But if it was a choice between Kate Beckinsale or watching Wesley Snipes walk around with his guns exposed, I'm sorry, let me rewatch Blade for like the 100th time. So, yeah.
We'll get to your boy toy. It'll be okay.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, I'm only here for Wesley and Idris.
So, Ian, how about you?
I know this is a vampire panel, but I love werewolves. I really felt for the werewolves in the movie. I like their history, which I thought was quite cool.
So, Steven, how about you?
Well, the way they laid it out, because of certain beliefs and things, I found myself, even though, everybody says, oh, Steve's a vampire, Steve's a vampire. I found myself rooting for the werewolves only because they were sort of put in the sort of underclass situation. And also considering the fact that the creator of the series, Kevin Grievous, was actually playing a werewolf in the movie. I don't know if everybody knew that, but a little fun fact for you. But you have to admit, Sabine, along with being nice to look at, she was also on a certain kind of mission of discovery. Kind of like, it was one of those things where you kind of like, oh, so basically everything I've been told is a lie. And I'm going to start working against that. And that part of the journey, along with it being, like a really cool action flick with very slick moves and everything else like that, overall, I found it enjoyable. Just for that variety of reasons.
Rick, what pulled you into Underworld?
First off, I'm going to be the totally pedantic nerd on the panel and point out, technically, it's not vampires versus werewolves, it's vampires versus lichens, and they make a distinction between lichens and werewolves in the series.
That's true.
That said,
Yeah,
I'm just going to say, you want to get my butt in a seat. I'm a big monster fan. Pretty much anytime you take something versus something else, I'm there, and I don't care about anything else. I mean, like Pacific Rim, when it came out, it's like, oh, giant robots versus monsters. It's like, I will buy a ticket right now without knowing anything about it. Vampires versus lichens or werewolves. Yeah, of course I'm gonna be there. And it wasn't in a comedy film like an Abbott and Costello Meet the Werewolf, or the Wolfman, which there's nothing wrong with, but having essentially an action movie that was dedicated to this whole concept. That was just the most awesome thing on the planet. And I'm kind of split because on the one hand, I want to root for the lichens because they are the underdogs. On the other hand, the vampires had Bill Nighy, and I just love watching him chew scenery. And he's just like when you throw him into a role, he just fascinates me on the screen. So little hard. It's kind of one of those. Whoever loses, I win watching this series. So,
in other words, shut up and take my money.
Pretty much,
basically.
Yeah. In other words, if I post it up, we can just take Rick's money all day long.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's actually talk a little bit of the lore and the setup for it. And Ginny, I'll come back to you when we get around to your
I'm like,
lore.
I know the lore and the setup, and I was back rewatching Wesley Snipes be Blade. So yeah.
So Jenny, when we look at kind of the lore and the setup we see between the vampires and the lichens, and when we look at kind of this, when we look at it, not necessarily just from the first film, when we look at the entire series of movies, there's a setup looking back through time, through history, kind of all these different plays where you have basically all the vampire houses, the vampire culture coming in, trying to play that whole high, heavy money, high, heavy power.
Mm-hmm.
And really just that lording over all of the lichens and this conflict between the two. And then finding out that much of this goes back to almost that Romeo and Juliet type of story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you look at the entire series kind of from that and the different things that get revealed along and that idea of Bill Nighy's vampires, that daddy figure, never mind the fact he killed all of Sabine's entire family, but it was looking at the lore along. What do you think about kind of how the setup works and just the story and the lore in terms of looking at what we would consider traditional monster movies and monster lore?
I think I'm going to kind of counter something Alledria said earlier about I don't want my vampires to sparkle. I don't care. That's a world that creator created. Okay. And so I can buy into that world or not, but vampires aren't real. Werewolves aren't real. Okay, so if you're making stuff up, make it up. I think one of the things that it did well, and I think that's why it has so many sequels and why people care about it, is it did create an interesting lore, and it wasn't a lore that ever attracted me. Okay, again, it's just for whatever reason, something that would normally, I don't know why, it's just never, it leaves me cold. But it doesn't matter because it's got a great lore. It's got stuff people can really sink their teeth into. And it's, thank you. We're here all week. Don't forget to tip your servers. And I just think that they did that well. A lot of times when you're building on a series, and I'm going to insert that, I think Blade did this well too, where it actually matters that you watch the next thing because more is going to be revealed and you're going to learn more about the characters in the world. I think they did that really well. I never felt like the next Underworld movie was like, oh my gosh, they're just going to be rehashing it. And no one I know that saw them felt that. So I think they did a good job with it. I think that's something that you as the creator need to do. I think you need to make it your own and make the lore your own and not copy anybody else's.
Ian, anything?
Let's see about the lore. I love the lore and just how like you mentioned, it's like very Romeo and Juliet, and just I guess that fear of the unknown. Even monsters are afraid of things that they're not, that they don't know, because a hybrid would be like this thing, like, and I think it just sort of fell into the politics of werewolves and vampires, where for the vampires, it's all about control and how would you wield power over something that is not fully a vampire. It's a little bit of both. And they're like just a big, like with vampires, I always just saw like how they were sticklers for tradition, like with the time hopping, how they had so many elders, and just for them to have the forethought to avoid inner conflict amongst themselves, how they like time hop. I was like, that was clever. Like you always had a powerful vampire that they had their turn and they were just sticklers. And for the wolves, they just wanted to, one, live their lives, and also just wanted sort of out of it. But I liked how they built it, and just like each movie sort of layered just even more on, like, it sort of went backwards instead of forwards. And it was cool how they did that. You start like in the heart of the movie, like in the heart of the conflict, the first two, and then the third one just sort of like, and this is why it happened. The rest of them were sort of meh, but overall, I liked the world building and just the history and just how it just kept unfolding like little layers. I was just so sucked into it. I loved it.
Steven?
Well, I think anybody that writes in this space, they'll take a certain creative license. And there was one thing in particular that I really liked about on the Underworld series that I don't think I've ever seen in any other sort of iteration of vampire werewolf stuff, was the vampire's ability to bite somebody and access their memories, kind of like some kind of like a download thing. That was, so first of all, that was dope. That was one of those things when you see it in the movie, you're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Damn it. It's like, because it's that good. And it actually, and the way they used it, especially in the first movie, it drives the story forward, because there's this like very shorthand thing that Bill Nye's character, he knows what's up. And it's like, that's not really how easy you want the villain to get the information, but it works. And I think we all have to, when we write in these spaces, the trick is come up with that stuff, but then keep it consistent. Like you can't break the rules of this later on, because people are going to remember it and people are going to blog about you because it's the 2020s. So that was the thing with me about the lore, is I guess like, so the world builds the overall cleverness. And yeah, it's a very Romeo and Juliet rehash, but I'm not necessarily there to critique that. I'm there to get a good story, enjoy the action, and that's what made it enjoyable for me. I didn't go into Underworld expecting Shakespeare in the Park. I expected, some fights and Kate Beckinsale in an outfit, and then and there you go.
Rick?
So one thing I liked about the lore was that, as you find out that vampires and lichens all stem from a common originator. There's these two species that hate each other, but at the same time are related, and that's why they can have hybrids and other stuff. Some of it's a little dopey. The whole one son was bitten by a wolf and one son was bitten by a bat. It's like good thing nobody ever gotten bitten by a mosquito or something. But it's a little dopey. It does require you to step back and be like, okay, we're just gonna go with this. But I love that. In fact, I kind of use that idea. One of my series is that vampires and mages essentially have a common originator. Even though these two races basically can't stand each other, so it kind of takes the concept of sibling conflict to and the ultimate level. But at the same time, despite all this hatred, I love the fact that a big theme of the second movie is Michael still loves his brother, even though his brother is a psychotic murder machine with no humanity left. And it just kind of brings home that that whole thing of these two races hate each other, but at the same time they're still related. And with relations, things can get messy.
But I mean, can you imagine if what they've been bitten by were a chihuahua?
Honey badger?
Yeah, I know.
A honey badger. I mean,
it's like, damn parrot bit me.
I want to suck your blood. Ah!
All right, Alledria, while you're trying to crack up now, what are you thinking about in the lore?
Oh man. Like several people, I did not go into it looking for a deep story. I got a deeper story than I actually expected. And I really did enjoy the backstory. Granted, you had to get through 2 movies to get to the backstory, but eventually you got to the backstory. Eventually you got to find out exactly why things happened the way they did. And at that point you go, all right. So I got 2 brothers, house divided, and then we turned it into a civil war. Sounds interesting. And then you have 2 people who are from opposing sides coming together to sort of heal the breach, I guess you could say. Except not really.
So, EM, I'm going to throw this at you. When you look at it and look at the series in totality, and for me, when it became humans have figured out that y'all exist, there was a little bit of a dip there. But, when you look at it, the whole arc, the whole series, I mean, where does this kind of fall for you? If somebody's looking for a series, who is it that really should be watching the series if they haven't seen it yet? For you, what are they going to get?
Well, I think, for this series, it was great until I think Celine became this super immortal vampire hybrid messiah that I think they just sort of went off the rails with that. But who would enjoy these kind of movies? Well, just in general, monster fans, people who just like good old-fashioned monster horror. Because I think, no, not necessarily monster horror. Honestly, the politics, it had that medieval feel, even though it was modern. So, I don't know, people who are fans of that, I think, would enjoy it. if I'm getting the question right, because I think it's sort of like,
What about you, Stephen? What are your thoughts? What are you going to tell somebody that's looking at the series?
Well, what I have come to appreciate about the series is just there is a little bit of everything. There's the political intrigue. And obviously it's varied degrees from movie to movie, but there's the political intrigue. There's a touch of romance. Kind of to EM's point, and it's kind of a fantasy thing. I mean, obviously you have to also be this kind of person that can tolerate watching somebody get their head taken off. So I mean, as long as you're good with all of those things, but occasionally a little kissy, it's I think that'll work out. That I think that's how I would counsel someone who's just coming to me blind, talking about I never saw the Underworld series. Would that be something for me? And depending on the person, if you're if you're too shishi foo, you probably can't do this. But if I know the person's actual horror tolerance, then I would be able to guide them appropriately, I think.
Rick?
I mean, I'm probably going to recommend the first two movies and then Rise of the Lycans. The other ones I might be like, yeah, if you see those, that's great. If you don't see them, that's also fine. But I'm mostly going to look for friends who are into sci-fi action, things like that. People who maybe enjoyed Aliens, people who probably enjoyed Blade. I know I dragged a bunch of people back in college to see Mortal Kombat, Dusk Till Dawn, movies like that. Movies that combine either a sci-fi or horror element though with action. I think they're gonna eat a movie like this up. Because also I think fans like that, they also know that when you watch a movie like that, you also kind of park your brain in neutral and just kind of go with it. And have fun with it.
Alledria?
I would definitely follow Rick's point to say suspension of disbelief, because literally, as to the previous point, none of this is real. So just enjoy. Go. Watch. See what happens. If you have to watch through your fingers when the person gets their head taken off, that's fine. Just remember to keep watching, because you might miss something important if you stop watching.
The important things often happen between a spray of blood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Jenny, who are you going to tell that absolutely needs to see this film? Because I know how much you've loved it.
Anybody who wants to see a vampire werewolf version of Jacob and Esau. Y'all don't realize what you all were describing was biblical. Okay, and I'm sitting here thinking, you're all like, this is so unusual. I'm like, no, it's several thousand years old. You've got Christianity and you've got Muslim religion, okay? And Esau remember, Abraham's the father of three religions, Judaism, Muslim, and Christianity. And so you have Esau going one way, presumably Lycan, and Jacob going the other way, presumably vampire. And it's like, oh, that's actually a super interesting take on that. How very interesting. But that's what my takeaway was from listening to all of you. This is a biblical retelling. And it sounds kind of cool. So anybody who wanted to see some kind of, a biblical retelling of, Jacob and Esau through vampires and werewolves, have at it. Pretty gory, but could be really cool. So, and by the way, Sabine becoming the Messiah, Jesus, really falls in line with everything else y'all described. So I'm just like, oh, they're really following a script here. It's a successful script. It's really lasted a long time. So that would be my recommendation.
I love that.
Hey, Reverend Olstein, I've got a recommendation for you.
Right? Let's do it.
You enjoyed Last Temptation of Christ?
See it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a crossover. All right, before I get myself in more trouble. So we're going to hop genres and hop series, and we're going to move over to the one that's going to make Jenny happy, and I'm going to make her wait till the end. So, Marvel coming out of Marvel is Blade, right?
Mhm.
I mean, this is, we've got comics, we've got TV series, we've even got a couple of movies that make Jenny happy. But when we look at kind of Blade lore overall, that idea of the Daywalker, the vampire that slays, vampires. Stephen, how did you come into that series?
Well, now we're talking some ancient history because I, as a child that probably shouldn't have even found this, I was a reader of the original Tomb of Dracula Marvel comic series. And as anybody that knows their trivia will tell you, Blade's first appearance, Tomb of Dracula 10, he's dressed like Shaft, but with like a bandolier of wooden knives. And it's very much sort of like if a vampire hunter were a blaxploitation character. He later, and like many characters from many franchises that have lasted over the years, he's evolved. Now he's like this black leather guy and with some armor and swords and things like that. Oh, swords. So people knew that I was such a fan of the series that I actually got this for Christmas once.
Dude, I got it on my top shelf here.
See, I knew I liked Rick for a reason. Anyway, so yeah, so the first two movies were like, and it was one of those things where a TV producer friend was like, I have something for you, and literally took me to a pre-screening where all of the effects weren't even finished yet. And it's just like, because I'm known for this, it's like everybody just inundated me with stuff. And then I saw the third film and I wasn't happy. So I'm glad that there's a reboot with an Oscar winner taking on the mantle, even though I know with the way Marvel does things, it's probably going to be like a whole big multi-universe thing. Wesley will probably end up back in the outfit because that seems to be, just like we had Tobey Maguire Spider-Man come back, and Andrew Garfield, I can imagine that he's not done with the character per se, but yes, Marshala, if I'm saying the name right, Ali, he's up next, and it should be very interesting.
How about you, Rick?
Same with Steven. Like, I read the old Tomb of Dracula books. I always loved Marvel's supernatural stuff. I loved when they transitioned to Midnight Suns. And one thing I loved is that, like, and they've since changed Blade a bit in the comics, but originally Blade didn't have any powers. He was just like, an angry guy. He couldn't be turned into a vampire, but he really didn't have any powers. And I liked the fact that they changed that for the movie. And I mean, when I heard that movie was coming out, I was just like, well, why wouldn't I see this? I love vampires. Mm-hmm. The concept of, like, essentially, this is not going to be a horror movie so much as angry guy who hates vampires. It's hunting vampires. And I know, like, when I was watching in the movie theater, the way the movie started off with that nightclub scene and the pulsing music, the second that came on, I was like, I'm going to love this movie. I remember, like, coming back and, like, reviewing it for this mailing list I was on, and I was like, it's a 10 out of 10. I was like, is it an instant classic? No, but does it give you everything you hope for in a movie? I was like, 100%. Like, I came out of that movie so freaking happy. And then, like, they changed it up with Guillermo del Toro with the second one, and he just worked his magic with that. And I'll even say, like, yes, the third one is the weakest in the series, but I don't hate the third one. I actually have watched it multiple times, and if you watch it for what it is, and also the amusing thing that apparently Wesley Snipes spent the entire time in his, like, trailer just, like, I don't know, just hating the director. There's some amusement to be had there.
I can speak to that later, but.
So, Alledria, how about you? What brought you to Blade?
Spider-Man. It actually, when he shows up in the Spider-Man animated series, is the first time that I saw Blade. And I was like, huh, interesting. because I was not previously aware of the character. So when you get to see his limited run through the Spider-Man animated series, you get to go, you kind of get to travel through. Okay, you find out that he is an angry black man who feels very jilted by what has gone on previously, and then the movie came out, and I was like, oh, so this, what I thought was a minor character from the Marvel Universe, got his own movie. And I was like, oh, I want to go see this because I want to know how do you build a whole movie around somebody that I thought for like maybe 5 episodes. So I was like, okay. I went in completely blind to really knowing who or what this character was. And I absolutely loved the first 2. The third movie is indeed one of the ones that I went into and I went, you what? I followed that storyline. I followed the storyline all the way to the end. And then I said, we're just going to pretend like this one is set in an AU. We're going to put it over here. It's like, because the first 2 movies follow quite easily. And then you have the third. And so, okay, alternate universe, I can watch it as something that does not connect to these other 2, and it still makes sense.
I do, however, like to pretend just a little bit, just a little bit that, that might be a pre-becoming Deadpool.
Oh, it was absolutely Ryan Reynolds.
Because
tryout for Deadpool. Absolutely.
Oh, it's absolutely the tryout, but I would periodically like to believe that ultimately that is the person that becomes Deadpool. I don't know.
I can see it. Yeah.
It makes total sense. It makes so much more sense than it does as a Blade movie.
You can see you can tell how tense it was on the set because you can really see Ryan Reynolds desperately trying to be fun and funny. So can't we all just get along? Let me tell another joke. Right? But I did enjoy it.
So Jenny, what brought you to Blade?
2 words: Wesley Snipes. Not gonna lie, if Wesley's in it, I want to see it. Especially again, he really bulked up for the role. Also, my husband is huge into martial arts and martial arts movies, and Wesley is actually a martial artist. So from that side, it's like, oh my God, he's actually probably doing his own stunts. This is amazingly well filmed, and we actually could see the fight scenes, which is always exciting in a martial arts movie, and not always a given. So yes, we saw Mortal Kombat in the theaters on the opening weekend. So, and I can't speak of Mortal Kombat 2. But Mortal Kombat 1 is an absolute favorite. But I went because of Wesley Snipes. I love his acting. I loved how he looked. And I think he's a very versatile actor who can play a lot of different roles. I mean, he can do comedy, he can do action, he can do drama. So I was super excited to see it. I really liked the storyline. I really liked the twists. I mean, I thought those were really good. I knew about Blade. We were collecting comics at the time, but I was really an X-Men girl. So X-Men at that time had 15 titles. You can't add more on if you're right. It was like every time you turned around, oh my God, there's another X-Men title starting. Okay, I'm trying to keep up. So it wasn't like we could add in. And before I can't remember which smaller comic company got engulfed. That Blade was one of their main titles, but we already knew it had been, overtaken. So we knew about it, but we had never read it. So it was definitely, for me, Wesley Snipes is Blade, and all others are, number 2. I'm sure Mahershala, I think, is how he pronounces it. Mr. Ali will do a wonderful job because he's a fabulous actor, but he won't be Wesley Snipes. I'll still go, but he won't be Wesley Snipes.
Well, the joke I've had about ever since I heard he was casted was that they found the one guy that looks more like Wesley Snipes than Wesley Snipes does.
Yes, he does, doesn't he? He really does. He really does. But I mean, he's a fabulous actor. He's just, for me, not quite Wesley Snipes.
So in other words, he beat out Wesley Snipes in a Wesley Snipes lookalike contest.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
So EM, how about you? How did you come to the Blade lore?
Well, I had forgotten that he was in the Spider-Man animated series, because I used to watch that like religiously. And then I used to collect, like Marvel used to do every year from A to Z, like basically like an encyclopedia, like each villain, each hero. It even broke down the universes, like what is it, the family tree, the lineage. And I ran across Blade like a couple times, but then I saw the trailer, and then I heard the soundtrack, and then I sat in the theater and watched the movie, and I was in love. Like, I just loved the movie, like the action, the soundtrack, the blood, like, I just loved all of that. And then the second one, I felt like the second one was even better than the first, because you had that history of like the original vampires, and just I think, what is it? I think it was like a sickness that was going through with the vampires that mutated them. I just liked all of that history. But it was like the soundtrack, it had everything. The martial arts, the soundtrack, Wesley knew how to put it together before I feel like before his head got too big. But the movies were like just art. They were like fabulous. And then again, there was the third one. I just sort of there was just not much to talk about with the third one. They could have done so much more, but I think they tried to sort of laugh off all the bad parts, but I just love the first and the second. And then I think I became fascinated with Damphiers, because Damphiers are pretty cool. Some have powers, some don't. And just even with Wesley and Blade, how like they started to give him a little bit more. So I think that made it even better. But that's how I got into Blade.
And so I remember a few of the old Marvel comics from the 70s, in the Supernatural series, and I remember a couple. I kind of, because it was one of those things that was sporadic in those days. But looking at the lore, how it has changed, from back then to now. I mean, how they've developed the character. I mean, we all know that Marvel and all of them, all the comics like to take and reboot and re-engineer and bring up characters to reflect the time that they're in. So, Rick, I'll start with you on this one. How do you feel about how they've progressed from, especially since you're reading it back in the good old days? How do you feel about how they've progressed and how they're representing Blade now, especially as we're looking about the fact that the Blade films really, in a lot of ways, are what created the ability for the MCU to exist? I don't think everybody thinks about it that way, but you had the Spider-Man movies and stuff, but Blade was kind of that next edge kind of storytelling that was darker, a little bit heavier, and a little bit truer to the comics, that they were able to create something that to me, Blade set that foundation they could build the MCU on.
Well, I mean, some like the very old school, like 70s and stuff comics. I mean, they're fun. They're also kind of cringe, though, when you look at them through today's eyes. So like they're some parts you reread them and it's like, this is super uncomfortable because damn, is it racist? But yeah, I mean, I consider Blade really to be kind of the birth of, I guess, the modern MCU before it became the MCU, because before then, Marvel movies pretty much were a joke, because Stan Lee was known to just hand off the
rights.
Yeah, the rights to pretty much anybody who wanted them for a handshake, and usually that resulted in some terrible movies. I think this was back at the time of like, when DC was riding high on like, on their Batman series still. So it was nice because I've always been a Marvel person to see them actually come out with a movie that felt like they were really trying. One, it was a good movie. Two, I love the fact that they made it an R-rated movie. Something is giving Disney agita right now, because it's like, yeah, you can make an R-rated comic book movie and it can succeed and it can be good. But I mean, I look at it as kind of that beginning. Ever since then, the Marvel movies took a decided upturn if we ignore Daredevil, and kind of brought us to where we are today.
How about you, Alledria?
Well, seeing as my understanding of Blade is only from the movies and what is decidedly a children's offering, even though yes, there was some pretty dark points in the Spider-Man animated series. You have to. I don't have as far to go as far as that is concerned, because I go from the animated series, which is almost put out, maybe 10 years before the movie, to the movie. Mm-hmm. And the character doesn't change very much between the two. He's actually very similar. So I'm actually now going to have to go back and look for Tomb of Dracula, which I was going to go look for anyway, because I was just recently on a Dracula panel, and I have to go back and watch the Hammer films and Bela Lugosi and all of that fun stuff, because I haven't seen it yet. My in some parlance, my understanding would be lamentably lax in what I actually know. So I basically have to go back and I have to educate myself. And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing, because I love research.
And for me, it was the, all of the different Universal monster movies that made me go read Tomb of Dracula and a lot of the other supernatural out of that series. That's what pulled me into those, was I loved all the good old monster films. So Jenny, how about you? What is it for, in terms of how you've seen things maybe shift and develop in Wesley Snipes' biceps?
It's so amazing, even though he's a little bit older. And just to defend him, he was being counseled by terrible people who were not protecting him, and as they should have in their roles. So as you can see, this is the Wesley Snipes Apologist Center. But one of the things I like, and again, we didn't really read those comics, but I've read a lot of X-Men comics, and the misogyny and casual unintended racism is really there in the older stuff. So one of the things that was super refreshing, especially when it came out, is that there is an unapologetic, powerful, angry, yet very efficient black man who is the unapologetic hero, and nobody's arguing. Nobody comes out and says, well, you don't have the right to be the hero. He is the only guy that can do it, and he is the only guy willing to do it, and he's awesome. So for me, that was a nice change in a lot of things. It really sort of seemed to herald a better awakening of a variety of things. And in the second movie, he falls in love with someone who is his equal. There isn't a lot of misogyny in there either. It's more of, he falls in love with her because she's powerful and she's strong and she's like kind of like him, but not. And I just really liked how they did that. And I wish we had a little bit more of that. I expected more of that than we got. So, Falcon as Captain America took a damn long time to get there.
Ian, how about you?
I feel like everybody's pretty much summed up a lot of my thoughts when it comes to just the evolution of just a lot of the characters from the past to the present. Because, I mean, the misogyny, the racism, all that was present. But just the fact that in Blade, he had agency. He was his own man. And he was also a smart man. Just even with his sword, like it was already preset that no one can really handle it except for him, and just he had a lot of forethought and just a lot of cleverness. It just wasn't like, I'm just going to come in and fight and kill and keep it moving. It's like he had plans, even to the point where he like adjusted his weaponry according to the situation. I was just fascinated with the weapons. Like, I love blood and guts and I love a great, sword, but just that boomerang, what is it, like a katana, like the boomerang that was like an oversized katana. I was like, I love this. I loved it. So I just like the fact that they became people, individuals, and not just like back in the day, like you have the X-Men, they're like just a group. There's Xavier and everybody else, but everybody evolved they evolved to where they have their own identity and they move in their own direction and not just as a group. So that's what I pretty much see out of it all. But everybody became their own person.
Steven?
So I guess I'll start with just a little behind the scenes stuff that I picked up over the years. So Marv Wolfman, who created Blade in the first place, he actually in an interview he mentions that he stopped using him for a little bit because he even realized that the dialogue was like just like, and I'm talking comic book stuff, sorry, but that the dialogue was just like stereotypical, and he needed to actually grow as a person before he could continue with using the character. And the other thing about the character is the character was so powerful that he was worried about him overpowering the other, the other white characters who were basically descendants from the Harkers and the Van Helsings, and Frank Drake, who's like the last living mortal relative of Dracula and all that. And so I used to stage manage Total Request Live. So I was there when Ryan Reynolds and Jennifer Beal were there for this interview sans Wesley Snipes, because he was not doing press for the movie because he was unhappy about various things that had happened in the movie. I've also heard that he and Dominic Purcell, I want to say that's the gentleman that was playing Dracula, which, and to be honest, that was one of the other things I disliked about the movie. I did not like him. I like him overall in other things. I ain't like him as Dracula. But again, I've been reading Tomb of Dracula, so I'm expecting certain things. And, this kind of looked like somebody I would run into on the way to an ice cream shop in Bay Ridge. I did not see him as Dracula. So I had, I and other people had issues with the third movie. Wesley Snipes himself had issues with the third movie, which is why he didn't do any press for it. And so the last thing I'm going to say is, because you guys brought up the X-Men, there are a couple of books out there when you start doing your rabbit hole research. There are a couple of books out there where Wolverine and Blade actually fight.
Mm-hmm.
So put those on your Amazon shopping list because they are out there and the covers are dynamic. So a little tip for you there.
I mean, anytime you throw those two at each other, it ought to be fun. So
absolutely.
Let's just talk about the cinematic universe. I mean, because the movies, and we can even throw in the TV show for everybody that actually did manage to catch that. Overall, I think we've all kind of hammered down the idea that the first two were solid. The third film, okay, Vampire Pomeranians, but that's all I'm saying.
Problematic.
Yeah. But if we look at kind of that package of movies and just what it brought to film, is it what overall, Did you get what you wanted? And what was your favorite part out of the cinematic universe? And I'll throw this to you, Alledria.
What was my favorite part?
Mm-hmm.
Huh. It's gotta be the final fight scene between him and I want to be a vampire god. That was
Deacon Frost.
Yeah, Deacon Frost. I was just like, because initially you're like, okay, he's technically supposed to. This is the wait. How much time have we got left in this movie? Because you know that Blade's going to win, but for a second there, you're almost like, how, and we don't have enough time left for like him to go and come back. So there's got to be a way that he's going to win this because that's how the movie's supposed to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when he finally does do in Deacon Frost with the serum that the lady has created, I was just like, oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. This is exactly how this should have gone. So, and then of course, Deacon Frost explodes into a million pieces, and then she starts working on a new serum because he's still Blade and he's going to go do his thing, and he's not ready for that to change.
Yeah.
So it's like, this sets you up perfectly for a sequel, sets you up very well for further growth of the character, because you watch him grow through the first movie, even though it's not as big of an arc as some people would have preferred. It is still a character arc. And it's like, the whole thing for me, that ending scene almost makes the movie for me. I mean, I loved all the fight scenes. The fight scenes were all great. Mm-hmm. But his final fight with Deacon Frost makes the first movie for me.
Jenny, how about you? What's your favorite? I know this could take a while.
Well, I'm kind of with Rick. That opening nightclub scene is awesome. Honestly, anytime I think of Blade, that's the first thing I think of. And Wesley doesn't even come into that scene until, it's halfway through. Just the whole thing on that is just so well done and just sets it up perfectly for everything. I enjoy the Whistler character. I like the relationship. But I'm going to defend Ryan Reynolds. I enjoyed the third movie. It wasn't as good as the other two. My husband is with all of you, by the way. He was just like, can we pretend it doesn't exist? And I actually enjoyed it. I saw what they were trying to get. I understood, because it wasn't a secret that Wesley was unhappy during filming, so it wasn't like that was hidden. And you're like, why isn't he, like Bela Lugosi? Why isn't he talking? Why isn't he in any scenes? Why has he not left his trailer? But I really enjoyed Ryan Reynolds, and Jessica Biel was fine. She's bland as far as I'm concerned. So, anyone, I feel like any chick who could fill in the bodysuit could have filled in the role. But I really enjoyed Ryan Reynolds in it, and it really was, as far as I'm concerned, his audition to play Deadpool. But I like the humor that runs through all three movies. It's not always dour. There's jokes, there's humor, there's gallows humor, but there's humor, and I like that. So that's part of why I like the third movie. There was a lot of humor in it because Ryan Reynolds had like double or triple the scenes he was supposed to, because Wesley wasn't leaving his trailer. So I enjoyed all of that. But really, if I have to pick one scene, it is that opening nightclub scene. It just sets it up for everything that's going on.
Ian?
I think there's like two scenes that do it for me with the Blade franchise, and it was mainly for the second movie. One was the fact that the vampires had formed a small specialized team to confront Blade. And I love them. Like you have Ron Perlman. What is it? Is it Danny or Donahue? But you had all these different fighters who were skilled. Like just that one scene where they infiltrated, like Blade's like base, base. How they were able to go toe to toe with Blade. I'm like, that was like, whoa. And then, of course, the part where they do the slow-mo walk to go and confront, the vampires, hybrids. So I just love that scene, especially even the soundtrack playing in the background. But the first two are just cinematically gorgeous to me.
Steven?
It's, I want to say the opening sequence where he's in the hospital and the cops shoot him and he's like, I can't say it here on the show. But it's the whole, have you lost your mind? And then the cops run and he does the leap from the hospital to the roof and everything like that. It's like, like I was already in, now I'm really in, and also I don't even necessarily say that Ryan Reynolds, I'm not criticizing Ryan Reynolds for what he was doing in the movie, but at the same time, I'm also looking at it from a cultural standpoint. I imagine Wesley Snipes reading the script, realizing that he's being kind of shoved to the side so these other two actors can get all this shine. And then also there's the thing with Dominic Purcell. So, I mean, all of that, he was probably pissed. And whether you consider him legitimately pissed on that, that I think that differs from person to person. But I could see where he was, legitimately kind of like, wait, I just spent these last two movies being this prominent character, and now you're gonna bring in Justin Timberlake's wife. I don't know. I
finish out my arc.
I can see his side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally on Wesley's side on that.
Oh, yeah.
Shocking. No one at all.
Rick, what's your favorite?
Well, I mean, I enjoy a comic book movie or series if I start incorporating some quotes from it into my everyday life. And I've been known on more than one occasion to occasionally say, yeah, some motherfucker's always trying to ice skate uphill. And I have a saved gift actually from the third movie, because I love to do this with my readers. It's like, Rick, why can't you be nice to your characters? Because the world isn't nice. I will say though, if I had to pick a favorite, it's not really even a scene, but I just like it, just from an actor's standpoint. I like from Blade 2, just him and Ron Perlman's character continually sniping at each other, because it's two actors I very much enjoy on the screen, and they're both just continually trying to one up each other, in it, and it's just fun to watch.
Can you blush? Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, is the first two movies looked like he had fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that to me was the first two movies just looked like he was having a blast doing them, running them, controlling them. And the third one just looked, why the hell am I here?
Yeah. Well, I think Stephen's point is very clear. And also it was talked about that you're taking a series that, again, is a strong black male lead. And I'm going to be shoved to the side for this pasty white boy, this even more pasty white girl, and this dude, right? So I get why he was upset. And I think he had every right to be. I still enjoyed the movie. But I mean, I think Wesley had every right to be upset. So.
You know what might have fixed this? If Woody Harrelson had been cast as Hannibal King instead.
Yes. Yes. Well, they're tight. I mean, and they
exactly.
Right? Pick somebody he likes instead of people he doesn't know. And then actually, and Woody Harrelson, instead of Dominic Purcell, that would have been an inspired casting choice because
that would have been great.
Can be
Okay.
he can be terrifying. He can channel scary redneck really, really well. And,
Was that Natural Born Killers?
The Born Killers.
Yeah. I mean, these other things too. I mean, even smaller parts. So, I mean, that would have been inspired. And yes, you're right. He would have been, oh, it's my bestie. Okay, we're good. And they would have had fun.
And I wanted to add just also the difference is I think Wesley is also a fan of Blade. Like he liked Blade, the character, and he just built it up. And this third film, you could tell it's just an industry project because I'm a fan of I never really cared much for DC, but the DC Dark animated series are way better than the stupid movies, the live action movies.
Yes.
Because the live action movies are driven by industry, like somebody's budget and some director, producer's ego, and they're not fans of the actual franchise, the comics. But then you have the I bought all of the DC Dark. I watch them a couple times a year, and I go all the way through from just the interviews with the people who made it, and they all have the same thing in common. They love the particular characters or the particular comic that they're making into a movie, like Flashpoint. That was fabulous. This Flash thing that they did was garbage. So that's the difference. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So yeah, that's the difference. It's just they took Wesley's passion project and made it into just tried to make it a cash cow.
Yeah.
Kind of the same thing happened with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man run. I want to say those first two, the second Tobey Maguire Spider-Man might be one of the best superhero movies ever made. And then you go right from there to emo Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And Venom shoved in because a studio exec wanted it in there. It's a mess. A mess.
Yeah.
Bean counters stay in the office. Let the creators create.
Yeah.
So
that's our definitive statement right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, is there anything we haven't hit on we need to talk about with Blade, other than the fact we could sit here and do this for another 3 hours?
Oh God.
No. I feel like we did it justice. Everybody should see them, including the third movie, even though it's not as good.
Get him his royalties. So before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys and your vampire lore. That, of course, everybody needs to pick that up as well. So, Rick?
Well, I have 2 series that people here might like. My Hybrid of High Moon series behind me, which I kind of tout as Underworld meets The Craft, if you like vampires versus witches. Oh, and Bill the Vampire, which is my own take on vampire lores. And you can find me, well, I am Rick Gualtieri pretty much on every social media site. So you can find me at rickgualtieri.com. You can find me on Twitter as Rick Gualtieri. You can find me on TikTok as Rick Gualtieri. Or if you can't spell Rick Gualtieri, you could just Google Bill the Vampire, and that will eventually bring you to me.
Alledria?
Hey, Steve, aren't we both in Slay?
As a matter of fact, yeah.
Yeah. If nothing else, you gotta pick up Slay Tales of the Vampire Noirs that both myself and Stephen Van Patten and Miss E.M. Lacey are all in. So if you want to see about the more melanin vampires, feel free to grab yourself a copy.
And you can we actually did a show on Slay to help launch that one when it came out, and that's a hell of a book.
Oh, I love that book. I had to buy a second one because I broke the spine because I was reading the stories, kept reading the stories, and I have my favorites flagged. So yeah, I love.
That's when you know it's amazing.
Oh yeah, that's fabulous.
Jenny, where can everybody find you?
GiniKoch.com. I'm all over the place on Facebook, X, Twitter, Blue Sky, Pinterest. Not really on Instagram, though it looks like it still. I have two things. I have every monster known to mankind in the Necropolis Enforcement File series in the first book, and that is the Ninth Beat. I also have a new release. This is in pre-order right now. It's a reissue of The Disciple and Other Stories of the Paranormal by me writing as Gemma Chase. It comes out officially October 24th, and it is a reissue, but it has new stories and a new intro, and there's lots of vampire stuff in here.
Ian?
Cool. All right. I'm Ian Lacey. I have one series that I'm actually getting ready to do a little reboot before I do my third book in it. It's called Biggs, Meyer, and the Vampire. And basically, vampires have legal problems, and you need a law firm that can handle it. So, Biggs, Meyer, and the Vampire, that's like out on the Zon. Anyone can find me on Twitter. Well, no, not Twitter. I got rid of them. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Facebook. I am also on Instagram. And then I also have another book that I just basically did a redesign. It's called Minor Mischief, and it's young adult horror. And in that particular series, I have a little guy. He's 6 with a vampire problem. There's no such thing as vampires. So, basically it's called The Boy Who Cried Vampire, and no one believes him that there's a vampire trying to get him because he's 6. So, it's just his imagination. And you get to find out how he fares against the vampire.
You said he has a vampire problem. I just picture like the vampire trap having to come in and get in contact. Stephen.
All right. So for me, I have a vampire series, Brookwater's Curse, volumes 1, 2, and 3. 4 will probably drop sometime next year. I've been putting that off because I've been putting out short stories like the one I have in Slay and a bunch of other places. I also have a serial killer series, Killer Genius, about socially conscious, hyper-intelligent Black woman who decides she is going to start knocking people off. I also have an anthology series that I produce with my podcast mates, Mark Abbott, Kirk Johnson, and in the next one, Denise Tapscott. And those are out. Everything, including the Black History animations that I work on for a YouTube channel called Extra Credit. All of that stuff, the minor little acting things and whatever else, all of that can be found, once again, at www.laughingblackvampire.com. I don't know where I got the name from.
And I've been your host, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, speculative-fiction-academy.com, creatingprose.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And assuming that nobody sucks me dry before the night is over, I'll see you again soon.